Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Wheeler, Editor-in-Chief at HW Media, and I'm excited to host today's Lunch and Learn on a very timely topic, which is underwriting in a rapidly changing market. After 2 years of blockbuster volume and revenue, lenders are now facing a rising rate environment with low inventory that's squeezing their margins. At the same time, underwriters are working with purchase loans and borrowers who may need more hands-on involvement. It's a recipe for risk that requires lenders to strike the right balance of humans and tech to achieve compliant, efficient underwriting. That's why we brought together these experts today to weigh in and have what should be a very informative and lively conversation. Let me introduce them. We have Sarah Knockel, who's data and analytics at Candor Technologies. Jen Lamano, Senior Vice President of National Underwriting Manager at NewRez. And John Saris, the Director of Mortgage Operations and Sales at Accenture. Welcome, you guys. So glad to have you on here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I should mention, Sarah, you're CEO of Data and Analytics at Candor Technologies. You don't just generally do data and analytics. So we're so excited to have you guys on here because we have some challenges right now, right, in underwriting and how we're handling underwriting. And so we really wanted to get you guys together. So let's jump in and really talk about the last 2 years as it relates to underwriting. Give us a foundation there, outline the ebbs and flows and what's currently expected from underwriting. And Jen, let's go to you for that.
Sure. Thank you. Happy to be here. Really timely conversation over the past couple of years. The challenges were different than they are today, right? After the pandemic and the volume that we saw in 2020 and 21, where basically, loans were coming in through the cracks, right? And we had a real shortage of talent. The things that we had to do in those years are different than what we're doing today. In 2020, in 2021, we really had to look to grow our own talent. We had to look to technology and really making sure that we were pulling all the levers that we could. And now, as you mentioned, compression in the market, rates rising, brings a whole new set of challenges and some that are sort of at odds with one another, which is interesting from an underwriting perspective. There's a huge focus on quality, always is in underwriting, right? Underwriters are sort of the gatekeepers of quality. But along with that quality is coming complexity, right? We've got niche products, we've got purchase volume. We are responsible for cost per loan, right? Much more emphasis on that when we're not, raking in all of the loans, and customer service. And really that one is really challenging for underwriting, I think, because of those other pieces, right? Our focus is to be on quality. Our focus is to be efficient and productive. But in these changing markets, we really have to help our sales partners in driving customer service, right? We have to make sure that we're doing a wonderful job to help support return business, whether that be in our retail channel with our realtor partners or in wholesale with our broker partners. Return business is critical in this market, and especially in a purchase market. So those are some of the things that we're up against.
I appreciate that. John and Sarah, would you like to jump in there?
Sure, Sarah. I'll also add that during the recent period of extremely high volume, when we had a shortage of underwriters, we had a lot of people with no experience suddenly thrust into, we're going to figure out how to turn you into an underwriter, or at least be able to do part of the underwrite. Well, the truth of the matter is, to create a competent underwriter is a 10,000 man-hour activity. It takes 5 years. So we had a lot of people getting on-the-job training in underwriting the last few years. And while you got to start somewhere, the thing is they might not have had the opportunity to learn best practices and the tricks of the trade that other underwriters have learned over their careers. So it puts us in a really interesting place now in terms of our talent pool.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to kind of piggyback on what you're both saying. This is a very cyclical market, right? It's an industry that's ebbed and flowing all the time. And, you know, these are problems we have faced as an industry before, but there's new ways that we're able to solve them now. It's not the ways we were doing things last year and the year before are definitely not going to work in the current climate, right? So it's about retraining, reskilling, upskilling the workforce to adapt to those changes, and whether that's, you know, a more focus on purchase business and a pivot from refi to purchase. It's a different type of process and a different type of experience. You know, so we're seeing, you know, how do we do more with less, right? Or, you know, how do we strike the balance between capacity and service level? And also be able to have enough scalability and flexibility for when the market comes back, because we know it will. Those are all challenges that we're seeing. I absolutely agree with both you guys on this.
Maybe I'll just, you know, sort of add a little bit to what Sarah had said about, you know, the time it takes to really learn all of those best practices. You know, those are some of the things that, you know, when we were bringing in new talent, right? This green talent that maybe didn't have a whole lot, because we did this, you know, in my organization, certainly. We really kind of looked to bring up some people with some mortgage experience, right? We really couldn't draw on processors to become underwriters because they were in really high demand as well. So we were really, you know, looking for people who maybe worked in post-closing or you know, former LOs or people who just kind of wanted to get into the underwriting world. And the challenge today is that we trained them on how to do rate and term refinances, right? Which had a shorter tail. And now we have a sense there's still this urgency to have that continuing education, right? To make sure that they get, you know, additional asset training, additional purchase contract training, product training, because of, you know, the market is becoming flooded with product, whether it be non-QM or, you know, traditional jumbo. And those things, like to Sarah's point, you know, it takes a number of years to become, you know, really proficient. Can they do the job last year? Those sort of entry-level underwriters, absolutely. Because there are a lot of guardrails. When you take the guardrails away and the product or the transaction becomes more complicated, and there's a higher focus on quality, right? When you're starting to look at some of those niche products, it's not just your internal quality, but you're talking about securitization, you're talking about due diligence, and there is, you know, more pressure on the underwriter to be perfect and provide really good service. Making sure that we're making call outs, making sure that our conditions are really clear and concise, and that everyone understands where we are in the process. So it is certainly a challenge. I think there are definitely ways to attack it. But, you know, none of it comes fast enough is really the tough part.
And there's more at stake, right, too now, right, Jennifer? I mean, if you think about it, you've got a borrower in the mix. You've got a seller in the mix, you've got a realtor in the mix, you've got a builder potentially in the mix, you've got a title company in the mix, and all of those parties can technically be your next deal too. So there's a lot more at stake. So that you've got a shrinking pool of borrowers. You finally got one, you went fishing, you got the borrower. Now you have to delight them to the extent where you're also, you know, having an opportunity to multiply that with the rest of the parties that you're interacting with. So yeah, it is, products are more complex. For sure, way more people to deal with. And you have to be really, to deliver the certainty that a borrower needs in a purchase transaction, it's got to be really fast. Not the whole thing. They're not, this is a big decision for them. It's the biggest investment they're making in their life. So it doesn't have to be, they're not expecting seconds or days to close on a house, but you got to be really responsive and really, you know, follow up routines and, you know, keep informed routines. All of that really matters right now.
Absolutely.
Listening to all that, you know, what part of what we expect of underwriters right now, especially, is reasonable, and what part is just maybe not possible from a, like, purely looking at, you know, we've got these humans working on it. And Sarah, I'll go to you for that.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I think it's not a task or a set of tasks that's unreasonable. It's actually the entire volume of information and the tasks we expect underwriters to master in order to be effective at their jobs. We actually have underwriters on staff at Candor. They are all seasoned professionals who had long careers at lenders before they joined us. And I've been spending a lot of time with them, interviewing them to understand their experiences and sort of the state of that practice in general. And I can't share everything in the time we have today, but I'll share the two most compelling things that they told me. So the first thing they told me is that they know the guidelines better now that they work for Candor than they did when they were underwriting loans every day for a living. So to kind of quantify that for you, the DU guidebook is 1,250 pages long. When an underwriter is working, he can't have it on his desk. He has to be able to recall from memory what's in the book, but also the latest version of it, because they change and they're updated frequently. If you have an underwriter who is handling multiple programs, multiply that volume of information for every program that underwriter has to be able to master. So that's just one of the things that is maybe unreasonable. I'll share one other aspect that they told me that I thought was really fascinating. So they have to master time management. A new file probably takes about 90 minutes to underwrite. So an underwriter will do 2 or 3 of them a day, but then they have to reserve time for the conditioning. The conditioning is a different activity than the underwriting. Underwriting is actually left brain. It's logical, it's objective. You're applying the guidelines. They fit or they don't. The conditioning is actually a right brain activity. It is subjective and it requires creative problem solving. So the underwriter a lot of times is having to play detective. They're having to use their intellect to identify anomalies in the file that don't have to do with the guidelines. They're not covered by the guidelines, but there's something else that doesn't make sense. And they're having to figure out how to resolve those kinds of problems and how to also create directional conditioning in order to resolve them. So that kind of an activity requires a lot of uninterrupted concentration and focus. And that's not necessarily something that's common given all the demands on underwriters.
Jen, I would love for you to weigh in on that. I know you're dying to.
Chomping at the bit to jump in.
I just want to, what she said. Yeah, I mean, all of those things, those are the challenges, right? That's what we're facing in underwriting. I was an underwriter for a lot of years, and there was certainly a different, I don't know what it would really be considered, but a different sense of, underwriters were kind of like behind a curtain. Don't bother the underwriter. They're doing their thing, right? And like I said, in this market, we really can't be that, because everybody in the organization has to be committed to the customer and to the experience. And we are on board with that. But the challenge is, how do we satisfy that while giving the underwriter the time to think, right? Because that is really the anxiety that an underwriter has, is if they get interrupted, if they don't have the time to think, what are they missing, right? What are we gonna find when the loan hits a pre-fund audit, or when it goes to due diligence audit? And really, those things are really important, especially again, with the change in the market. Every dollar counts, right? We don't want to spend unnecessary money on the back end fixing loans, or having to sell them scratch and dent because they don't fit into whatever investor or guides that they were meant for. So that is absolutely the challenge. And there's no sure thing here. There's no clear-cut answer on how to do that. But we have to sort of keep marching toward it. It's really a problem of old. It's a mortgage problem of old. And I couldn't agree more with what Sarah just said. Now she kind of brought a little bit of science to it, left brain, right brain, but it's really interesting because the characteristics and the personality of an underwriter is definitely analytical, and that focus time is really important.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the perspective of left versus right brain as well. it truly is, as I think about the underwriting process, that it is it's a different process altogether, whether you're conditioning and you're kind of a sleuth or not, you've got your magnifying glass out looking for things to, make sure that you've assessed the risk properly. And then, conditioning is a whole different thing. Hey, does it meet the guidelines? It's more of a checklist type of event, right? To most degrees. So I've really enjoyed that perspective. And I think in our business, we work with a lot of different lenders and, bank, non-bank, all the way into servicing. And everybody kind of does things differently. So Jennifer, you're right. There's not one way to slice this, but it's unique to it's a common problem, but it's solved in many different ways, or at least we've seen it solved in many different ways at various clients. But I really enjoyed that, Sarah. That was the science behind it was really powerful. Yeah, I agree.
I think we're kind of reaching the limits of human capabilities when you think about it. One other science fact I'll throw out there is that the human brain is really at its most effective level for maybe the first 4 hours of work in the day, and then it starts to deteriorate. And so you definitely have underwriters doing critical work beyond that 4th hour of the day. And maybe that might be when they're even trying to get into that really deep focus work. So, we're kind of reaching the limits of human capability here.
I think that's a great point. So much of what we do in our daily work, whether we're, underwriting or other parts of the mortgage business, you have to account for the fact that people are human and we operate a certain way. And so my next question is really about how companies are structuring their underwriting process, to meet this cycle, manual versus automation, what worked, over the last 2 years that's not working now. So how are processes changing? Oh, and before you guys answer, I wanted the audience to know, you can feel free to ask us questions too. You can just click that Q&A button on your screen and put in a question, and hopefully we can get to that before we're done. But I did want to ask about the processes and how they're changing now. And Jen, maybe you can speak to that.
Sure. It's kind of an exciting time. I will say that, in my career, I've seen a lot of supposed technology solutions. And probably in the past 2 to 3 years, I finally started to see things that I think, that might work. That might be good. There's pieces that I think, really are starting to come together, right? We're scraping data, we're OCRing documentation, we've got robotics, and we're building rules around those things. It's just really, it's sort of an exciting time. And when I think about all of that, right, when I talk to my staff and when I talk to teams that I'm working with in how to do this, I often say that what I really want underwriters to do is the only tasks I want them to do are things that lend to a credit decision. I don't want them to do administrative work, right? Data entry, organizing our file doc management systems, things of that nature. It doesn't make sense to pay an underwriter who's, one of the higher paid in the chain, right? There's incentive plans and overtime being paid. It doesn't make sense to do that. So, I think there's a couple of things that are happening, right? We've got, we outsource some of that work. We, look to some technology solutions, but I'll be excited when it all comes together, right? I was telling someone an example recently when an underwriter, looks at a pay stub, right? We need a pay stub for our borrower. And, it's not as simple as, oh, yep, look, we have Jen Lamano's pay stub. Yep, we have it. There's so many decision points in a pay stub, right? We're looking at addresses. We're looking at direct deposit. Does that match the asset statement? We're looking at how are they paid? Is that year to date in line? Is it in line with what they've earned for the past couple of years? Do we expect that to continue? Does this salary make sense for the line of work that they're in? Those are things that are not on the pay stub, but things that we have to think about. And when we can extract the data from that pay stub, serve up a calculation to the underwriter. What I would love is when the underwriter only has to do the exception work, right? The calculation oftentimes is not the hardest part. It's sort of, the intersection of all of the other documents, all of the other pieces of information that are on that pay stub. And I'm giving the pay stub as an example, but that's every piece of documentation that an underwriter looks at for every loan file. So, there are things that are being done manually. There are things that are starting to get the right traction and automation. But that's sort of my utopian world, right? Is when an underwriter is served up all of the information that they would need, and maybe they have a summary page and some green lights and some red lights. And the green lights, underwriter doesn't have to look at that. The red lights, underwriter dig in a little bit more. That's really, I think, where we need to go. And that's going to help us to be scalable, right? So that we can, back to the first question about ebbs and flows, that's how we're going to be scalable. And that's how we're going to, forge the next few years in the industry, I think.
Well, we have two technologists on this panel, so I'd love to hear from both of you about this.
I'll jump in. So Jennifer, the ideal state that you described, I believe, is actually what Candor does today. So if anyone can see the title above my it says the machine as underwriter. And what we have been hearing from our clients, how they've been using our machine as underwriter, is that it's taking things off the plates of underwriters that they don't really need to be doing. And it's allowing them to focus on the complex aspects that actually need a human to address. So just as an example, our system does take in all the data that you would normally present to the underwriter. It analyzes it. It does those corroboration checks like you were talking about, do the deposits make sense? Does the pay stub make sense? It applies the guidelines, and then it gives that roadmap, a checklist of this is everything you need to address to make this loan. It even clears some of the conditions if presented with the appropriate information. So I would love to maybe talk to you a little bit about that more.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I mean, at Accenture, we believe underwriters should focus purely on the highest value activities for a credit decision. They shouldn't be doing the tedious, time-consuming tasks, especially the manual stare compare activities and rekey. I mean, that's really why productivity has not really been going up. If you look at overall productivity, it's been going down year over year. It's because underwriters are dealing with a lot. And especially in high volume environments, it's still a very paper intensive process. Mortgage in general, it's ridiculous when you look at all of the things that have to be analyzed. And in order for an underwriter to even do their job, they've got to make sure the data is right, make sure the documents match, make sure they're labeled correctly, because 9 out of 10 times they're getting something that's not decision ready. And that doesn't stop the underwriter. The underwriter will still go do those tasks. So back to your point, Jennifer, I mean, they're too highly paid and highly valued on the floor to be doing those kind of things. So that's how we look at automation. I mean, as far as what we see though in the market and the process and how people are applying automation in underwriting, it widely varies. It really depends on the operational maturity of the organization, what their tech stack looks like. And then you've got some people doing it really smartly and others that are just trying to automate it, thinking they could do it out of the box. And that's the wrong approach, because you have to get your process right before you start automating it, period. Full stop. Automation applied to something that's inefficient is not going to work. And I'm not saying that underwriting processes are inefficient, but we just talked about at the top that we just pivoted from a refinance world to a purchase process. That's a total different thing. We've all talked about the different skill sets. Well, it also requires different action points and different steps. So, we look at the process first, work from the foundation, utilize analytics and feedback loops to figure out what that efficiency is and where the extra steps are. And then we start applying automation to those things in order to give an underwriter a loan with a bow tied around it so they can make a decision first.
Well, let's talk about, as you said, there's a variety out there, right? So from the three of your perspectives, what is the absolute minimum here on automation that should be done? Another way to put this is, what parts of the underwriting process make you cringe when you know someone is going to be doing it manually? Like what should be the bottom line? John, start with you.
Well, generally, again, right, underwriters spending time on a file that's not ready to review, right? Every client's different, so nothing, I want to be careful about saying makes me cringe. But quite frankly, anything that's stare compare, we need to digitize it, right? Like that's a good solution for that problem. And there's different ways to do that. But if you could get the data, accurate data that an underwriter can learn to trust, because it is going to require some change management too. Underwriters, they're hired to look at everything, right? That's what you want them doing. Well, you also want them to be able to trust the technology and the change management of a new process. But really eliminating that stare and compare activity is a huge way forward for driving that scalability and efficiency that will increase underwriter productivity. But even while it's a manual process, getting a file that's labeled, all the docs are present, right? Everything's the conditions are attached to the right thing, and AUS has kind of already been pre-scrubbed. Now an underwriter has a standardized path to make a decision and analyze all those different points that Jennifer and Sarah brought up. And I think that's key. It will solve a lot of problems that, a lot of the challenges that underwriters are facing, especially as volume comes back. They're going to need a better mousetrap in order to underwrite more effectively, or we're going to keep hiring and firing and retraining and all of this. I mean, it's been going on for 50 years. I mean, so the industry's at a point right now where there is new ways to solve these problems, and that's one of them, in our view. The other thing that I would add on to that is that, quality in is going to give the underwriter a better experience. It's going to give the borrower a better experience. It's going to give the loan officer more chance of a better pull through. I mean, everybody's impacted by improving those processes, right? But yeah, that would be my answer. Fixing the quality in so an underwriter could get right to the decision-making process would be a key point to start to look at.
I like everything he said.
I know there's not too much to add. It's the wasting an underwriter's time, I guess, is the thing that I hate to see. So anything that ensures that they receive everything they need in a timely fashion and can be of the best use possible on the file. Reducing the friction points, which is the back and forth. I thought I had everything, now I don't. It has to go back again. The friction points slow down the process. The other thing I hate to see is when underwriters have to do rework. So they have somehow had their process disrupted and they have to go back and redo what they already did.
Yeah. And really, all of those things that John and Sarah are talking about that disrupt the process, they're felt in the customer experience, right? And that's what we have to eliminate, right? Because like I keep, mentioning that because we talk about it a lot in the industry as we're changing, right? To be competitive, we have to provide a nice, smooth experience, right? It is one of the most stressful experiences that anyone goes through. It's an enormous investment of both money and time. And, and it impacts a person's entire family oftentimes, right? So, whatever we can do to improve that experience and all of the mechanics in the process lend to that, right? So we have to keep at it. We have to keep chipping away and finding ways to make it better. And, what these guys are working on is pretty exciting stuff.
I would add one more thing, Sarah, if I can. Once an underwriter does have a quality data output, to work on, and they've got everything, the other gap that we see quite often in different operations is underwriters are working across multiple systems. They're using spreadsheets over here. They've got this tool for that. They're doing this. There's so much, I mean, it's so complicated and so inefficient when you look at it from that standpoint. So the other step that lenders can take is to unify, decouple legacy LOS kind of pitfalls by using smarter technology that are more workflow tools, business rules driven, that unify all of these things. So an underwriter's in one place, focused left to right, they can work. It's more of a human in the loop process than I'm all over the place, right? Because when things are organized and all in one place, the data's right, the documents are here, everything's there, and I don't have to go to an outside system for anything. And my business rules are helping me focus on exceptions. I can be much more effective. So it's also that internal process, that middle process, that's really key to get right as well, not just the way in, but also how the underwriter works as well.
To support what John said and expand on it, the challenge you have is that the LOS is the system of record. So the underwriter has to return there for all of their results, but a lot of their tools are outside that system, and there's a switching cost when they have to jump around. That's actually one of the reasons that we actually have built our Candor products into the LOS, so that the income calculations, the directional conditioning, which tell the people before the underwriter exactly what they need to go do and find, so that the underwriter can be effective. We've put all that inside the LOS to try and minimize the problem John was describing of the underwriter having to look in too many places.
Jen, this next question is for you, because as we've talked about, now we're in a purchase market. So underwriting a purchase loan is difficult enough, but what happens when lenders add, a bunch of new products, including non-QM products, and now you have people who are not only doing purchase, but maybe some pickier loans? What does that look like?
It gets tough. It's tricky. And, back to Sarah's point about, it really takes about 5 years for an underwriter to, get proficient in what they do. There are not many non-QM underwriters who have been underwriting non-QM product for 5 years. So there's, strong market demand and the products are there, but the expertise is not there, right? Underwriters generally underwrite to, AUS guides. These are full manual underwrites and alternative documentation. So it kind of take everything that even an experienced underwriter who has been underwriting for 5 or more years, you can pretty much take a lot of what they know and throw it out the window, because this is a new deal. So there's a great deal of, sort of mentoring and coaching that needs to happen. The hiring process changes a little bit. I'll say that, because when you are going to, offer a wide suite of products, you really need to have underwriters and staff who are adaptable, sort of accommodating when it comes to change, willing to learn, right? I've been an underwriter for 25 years, and there's new products coming out and I have to learn new things. So the way that I've been doing it for 25 years isn't going to work. So it really has changed the landscape of hiring, training, and what that means, right? What kind of candidates we're looking for to do those products. I'll kind of go back to, oftentimes this is what was exciting in 2020 when we were able to bring in a lot of entry-level underwriting positions, because, these are people with a new eye, new experience, looking at things a little bit differently, maybe a little hungry, eager to learn. And those characteristics are really important when you are hiring, when you're rolling out additional products, because sometimes it can be challenging to get your experienced underwriters to want to do those products, right? Because they are definitely more challenging. They take more time. Oftentimes the loan amounts are higher. So, there's more pressure on getting it right. So, the product mix and the purchase shift is definitely a challenge. And, technology, continuing education, a lot of coaching and mentoring are what's going to help us meet those demands.
I'd agree. And I'd also add on top of that, right? It's adoption of all the things that Jennifer just laid out. Having those tools, having new processes, having new ways of doing things is only as effective as the people doing them, actually applying that and really standardizing the process to the extent possible, even though these unique products like non-QM are not very standardized, right? They're by nature. But one thing that can help too is tailoring the low-hanging fruit processes, really getting those honed in and refined first. It could be a step forward towards positive change, because now you could free up bandwidth for your non-QM underwriters to really just focus on doing that more manual until we find a way to solve those more complex loans or outside of the box thinking loans that are less, formulaic. So I think adoption's key. And again, refining the overall, byproduct, right? Like, hey, I've got an FHA team, I've got a conventional team, I've got an 80+ LTV team, I've got a, self-employed income team. Now you've got specialization, and it's easier to train and skill that too.
I couldn't agree more with that. Even, bifurcating the collateral review, the condo review, making sure that experts are focused on what they know best and getting those pieces right, but then also making sure that those processes flow together so that no one loses sight of the holistic picture, right? Making sure that when, maybe your collateral team reviews an appraisal, that they know when to sort of raise the flag, because maybe there's an eligibility issue, right? The value is supported, but maybe there's an eligibility issue that it's a unique property or something of that nature. Making sure that when you do bifurcate those processes or segment certain products, that there's still the right communication and flows between those departments.
Agreed. And that's also where AI and automation can help too, right? Having really intelligent or more intelligent than in the past workflow tools that can help sequence those events based on business rules, can also keep the management of those workflows, to your point, right, really efficient. Like, hey, when X happens, that triggers Y, and so, because a lot of that stuff can happen in parallel too. So, and that's another way to drive efficiency. So absolutely love that.
Let's talk a little bit about, teaching old dogs new tricks, right? So clearly, underwriters need to be flexible and adaptable in a changing market. We think about the people that were hired in 2020 or 2021 now, the people now, who knows where we're going to be in 2 to 3 years, whatever. Like, we know that this shifts. And so we need to have people who are flexible. At the same time, to your point, Jen, underwriters who have been doing it for a really long time may not want to do things differently, or we have all these brand new people who were trained one way, but not for this. So let's talk about the two different philosophies that lenders can really take, which is either hiring talent, right? We saw that a ton, as they needed people to handle the refi business, right? Going out there and hiring people who are already trained at other companies, poaching them or attracting them, whatever you want to call it, versus growing talent, bringing in brand new people and growing that talent. And John, I'll ask you about that first.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a strong believer in upskilling and reskilling the workforce, right? So I think it's a combination of going to market and nurturing talent that you've got outside of the industry even, right? And to add on top of that, and it kind of goes into the other themes we were talking about, but specialization plays a key role, because you can, it's harder to train someone on everything, right? And it's a lot easier to train people on a certain thing, on a specific thing. So if you could do specialization, that upskilling, reskilling thing is not only an employee satisfaction retention thing, because people really do. I mean, if you love mortgage and you love what you do, like an employer coming in and training you and upskilling you and reskilling you and nurturing you, like that, I'm all about that. Like, I would love to learn something new every single day. So I mean, I think that's fundamental. And when you have that kind of culture, you also attract some of the best people in the market. They want to come work with you. So I think that again, really upskilling and reskilling. This is kind of how we think about it. You have to have scale really for specialization to work though. I mean, it won't work on some of the smaller platforms, but I really think that is that's how we think about an optimized manufacturing back office, having really dedicated specialized roles, working in tandem to finish the loan.
I think one of the things when you're thinking about are you competing for talent in the marketplace? Pretty much any industry now, potential employees want to know that there's a path to continue to develop themselves when they join a company. I think it's rare that they are just going to take that one job and do it forever. So being able to offer them that opportunity of development and a path is very important for acquiring new talent and taking the people you already have and getting the most out of them, because acquiring new employees is expensive and you want to make the most of the people that you have and give them a place to grow into so that you don't lose them. So one of the things we've seen some of our clients do is use the Candor loan engineering system to actually train processors about how underwriting works. The conditioning that comes out of the system is so directional and instructional that it tells them exactly what problems they need to solve and how to solve them. And so we actually had a client that was starting a training program using our tool.
And Jen, I know you have a lot to say about training and sort of growing your talent from within.
Yeah. Sort of to John's point, I think it's a combination, right? I want to continue to infuse new talent into the business, right? We won't go forward very many more years if we don't bring new underwriters into the fold, right? And then continuing education, making sure that people continue to stay proficient in what they do. During the pandemic, right, we saw more guideline changes than I had probably seen in my entire career in underwriting, and very difficult to keep up with that, right? There were lots of memes and other funny things around the guideline changes, stack pictures of stacks of paper and, another guideline change. But we really have to, stay on top of that for underwriters to, keep that breadth of knowledge and continue to learn, right? And know when to apply those new guides. Learning new skills, whether it's how to calculate self-employed income, how to look at bank statement income, developing a cash flow. What is a cash flow, right? There are so many areas that you can deep dive into to, create a continuing education system. And, I think both Sarah and John touched on it. There is, a sense of employee satisfaction when your company is invested in you learning. I tell people all the time, I've been with my current employer for 7 years. And before that, I was somewhere else for 20 years. So I'm an anomaly in the business, but I want everyone to want to stay at our company, right? I want everybody to stay there. Maybe they don't want to stay in our department, but maybe they're going to move on to capital markets, or, they want to go into processing. They want to do something else. I want people to feel like they have that opportunity. And that they're going to be given the skills to get there. And that's really, really critical. It really is. So continuing education, whether that be continuing their underwriting education or their mortgage education, is very important.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, we started this conversation with the market landscape and having to be more adaptable and agile and pivot. Well, if you have a training function or a successful employee lifecycle program, right? Like, for example, about 7 years ago, we started our own mortgage academy. It's role-based. So everything, think processing, underwriting, closing, and it's literally boot camps to prime that next generation of talent. And we've actually stacked those hires, academy graduates, up against industry experienced hires. We have faster ramp to proficiency, better productivity, and higher employee satisfaction out of the gate with a brand new resource. And again, it's just a testament to the fact that people really, they want to learn. They want to, and they need to learn, because if we just talked about processes changing, technology coming in to assist and be part of that human talent machine, right? We got to do things differently. So if you don't train them on the new processes and all these pivots that, new products, new ways of doing things, you're going to find them get lost, and then it's easier for a competitor to come in and poach them, because the grass is ultimately greener if they feel like it is, right? So, I mean, it's a huge retention capability, training the workforce, at least in our view, and where we've seen it working. So I'm very passionate about that.
Love to see some of our listeners jumping in the chat here. We had Eric Webb give a shout out to Candor, and talked about how his company is using checks that are already in a processor's head, and thus better file submissions are using Candor does the checks that were already in a processor's head. So that's really interesting. We got another question there. I do have a question here that we talked about when we were doing the prep, and that is, in the current environment, who should own the file? Has that changed? Like, who should own this file? And Jen, I want to go to you first.
That's a loaded question. I think, everyone does ultimately, right? Everyone, the lender needs to feel a sense of responsibility for that file, right? The place where we sometimes get jammed up is that underwriters are often they have the most expertise, technical expertise. They are responsible ultimately for the quality of, the file, ensuring that it's going to be insurable, saleable. And so when there are hiccups in the process, we've been talking about all of, sort of our dream processes and utopian worlds, but it's not always like that, right? There are glitches in our LOS. There are things that we identify as delivery errors, things of that nature. And oftentimes we have to come up with short-term solutions for those. Oftentimes they land in underwriting. Underwriter add a condition to make sure that, we don't have this delivery edit, or underwriter makes sure that the documents are in the file manager the way they should be, so that when we bundle, they're delivered properly. And then oftentimes those things are deprioritized. And that's where underwriters, have a sense that we own the file. And so, those are some of the things that need to be solved for, because again, to everyone's point here, we don't want underwriters being responsible for things that could be solved with technology, or live somewhere else in the process. So it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that we sort of are marching towards these utopian processes that I talk about.
Any comment there, Sarah or John?
I would say I agree with Jennifer. It's kind of hard to not have everyone own the process, because it's a team effort. There's no way to complete it without each person that's a part of the process. However, I do think it's a situation that's ripe for artificial intelligence to provide that oversight and ownership of the file. And I would even posit that for customers of Candor, Candor owns the file for them. It's where the buck stops, and it says, this is a problem that needs to be addressed by someone on the team.
I would just echo what both perspectives here, right? Jennifer and Sarah both bring up really valid points. It is a team sport. I also see technology in our business playing a role in being kind of the pipeline driver or owner. I mean, there are human in the loop, but it's, again, it also depends on your model too. If you're generalist versus a specialist, yeah, someone's ultimately got to own that. But if you have specialists in a bifurcated process, the AI or the RPA or the business rules really own that file. And in that regard, your operational leaders and your IT leaders are coming together to monitor that and make sure that that there's no gaps, and and that's a continual process, right? Making sure that things are firing in the right places at the right time and the right people have the right tasks. So, I think to the utopia, I love the way Jennifer calls it utopian processes. She's absolutely right. It's not a perfect world yet. And we'll make strides, and everyone's journey, we call it the journey to intelligent operations. It's very unique and very specific to each company and culture. And the key is that it's attached to their strategy, right? It's not a one size fits all model, but I think workflow, people, talent, and process, it all has to come together for you to have the ultimate process, especially again, in a market that requires agility, and you got to be great. And this is a game of inches, right? So being great sometimes just means that one little tweak, and that wins the race.
We have a question from one of our listeners, and I think it's a good one. It says, as the market moves to an AUS environment for both non-agency and HFI, is the discussion taking that into account to meet bank and PLS appetite and file constructs? So, I think that's a great question as things shift a little bit on that. So I don't know who wants to answer that, but feel free to jump in. Anyone?
So I'm gonna take a stab at this and say we've actually been talking about this at Candor a lot lately, and what is going to happen to the secondary market, right? The appetite for consuming all of these loans. And we think that not only is data needed to enhance the mortgage manufacturing process, it's needed to inform the secondary market decisions that are going on. And so the more granular the data that you can capture during the manufacturing process, the more valuable it is downstream to those who are going to consume the output and the product. And that's actually one of the primary things I'm focused on in a data and analytics business in mortgage, is capturing that data and then building analytical tools with it.
Appreciate that, Sarah. We did have a very Candor specific question, which is, does Candor review flood certifications and compare to the appraisal report to confirm they're consistent? So
not yet, but it conditions for them. It actually conditions for every aspect of the underwrite. If it's something that we can consume the data related to and clear it, then the machine will clear it itself. If it can't, it simply says this must be addressed, and it assigns it to the lender to handle. We are continually expanding our capabilities, though.
That's great. Appreciate that. What are some other ways that data can help lenders beyond just sales and marketing, right? You talked about this a little bit, specifically about optimizing manufacturing. Like, we have tons of this data. What are we doing with it when it comes to underwriting?
Well, first, I'd say it's important to make sure that you're collecting the right data. And that's something that I think has been a miss in the industry for quite some time. I've been building predictive models since before the meltdown, and the types of data available to us is actually rapidly evolving. So one of the things that we make sure we collect at Candor is all of the really granular metadata that is part of the information that goes into the underwrite. Typically, these are pieces of information that only are known to the underwriter. They're on their scratch pads, they're in their Excel file, but then when they finish the file and they move on, that data is lost. And if you have to ever return to the file, you have to reverse engineer and try to figure out what happened. We save all of that data. And we even call it our loan DNA, and we have it on 1.7 million loans right now. So imagine if you had this loan DNA, that you lived in a world where when you started a loan application, you had a dashboard that could tell you the likelihood that this loan will close, the days till you get it closed, and the cost to close. And what if, in addition to these predictions, the dashboard also told you, if you change just a few features about this loan, you can shave an extra day off, or you can save an extra $100. So that's actually a form of machine learning called optimization. And it's just one of the things at Candor that we will be using our loan DNA to do.
Really interesting there. I don't know if John or Jennifer, if you have any other thoughts on specifically using data.
Well, that's hard to top, but we do think about measuring operational performance in the same way. So we run similar closed loop feedback systems on our operations, so on our workforce that are working on various clients. And that's a great way to start to drill down into trend analysis and behavior, because I mean, we're all humans, right? And there's variance in human behavior. We track that to the granular level, and then we utilize those insights to help inform either transformation opportunities or training opportunities for staff, or hey, what should we be automating? What shouldn't we? And then we bring that information to our clients to, hey, we think there's a business case in this, this, and this, and this, and that data, helps them make decisions. So I love what Sarah's talking about to even next level too, right? So data is everything. I think it all starts with getting your data really right and tracking it.
Love that. I'd like to end this with, first of all, just saying thank you to you guys for coming on and giving us your expertise. Several of the people in the comments were like, this is great. Feels great to know that we're not the only ones dealing with all of these problems. And we knew that this was a topic we wanted to talk about, because we know that this is a challenging time for everyone as we're trying to pivot. So I guess one thing I'd like to end on is just go around and say, what's one thing that really gives you a lot of optimism about underwriting as we go through this next cycle. And Jen, let's start with you, because you've been through a couple cycles already.
I have. I think what's exciting is, still this opportunity to bring talent into the industry, ideas flowing, really gives me sort of hope. People who enjoy underwriting will always enjoy underwriting, and underwriting is always going to be there. I can remember when, I am certainly dating myself. When AUS models came out, right? Underwriters said, "Oh no, we're not going to have a job anymore," and that's certainly not the case. So, the idea that technology takes our jobs away is not really thought of anymore, and people are getting excited about the prospects, about taking the mundane pieces off and giving us the stuff that we love, and that's the decision making. So I'm excited about that.
Which is exciting, because to your point, instead of really resisting this, whatever technology is coming, whatever they could possibly be doing, or adoption, it's like this could really be the key to doing what they really enjoy in the whole process.
Absolutely.
Sarah, what would you say?
I would agree with everything Jennifer said. And what we like to say at Candor is that artificial intelligence and machines aren't going to replace underwriters. They're going to make them bulletproof. They're going to allow them to use data smarter. They're going to ensure the quality so that, they don't go to bed at night worrying, did I miss something? Did I forget something? Am I going to have a problem? And then also the use of technology is going to provide an opportunity to remove bias wherever it might exist.
Great. And John, we'll end with you.
Sure, thanks. Listen, I'm very optimistic about the future in our space and where we're innovating. There's a lot to innovate. There's a lot of, and we don't have all the answers yet, right? And I think that that's exciting too, to be able to tackle these challenges and find new ways to do things. I think that that's really awesome. And as we can improve processes and operations, at the end of the day, we're in this to give borrowers, our customer, ultimately the end customer, their dream. There's nothing really more thrilling than that. And so I'm excited about both of those things, helping organizations grow and thrive in spite of market cycles, and be really helping the end customer have a better experience. They shouldn't feel like they're going to the dentist every time they get a mortgage, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. So I think the opportunity for change is what excites me most.
I love ending on this up note, because we know that this is cyclical and there are some good and bad things about every cycle. When we're in the middle of the refis, no one could even take time to really make sure their processes were, it was just like drinking out of a fire hose. There are challenges every time. So glad to have you guys on to help our audience, navigate these challenges, and just wanted all our listeners to know, if you missed part of this, or if you want to share this, the presentation will be available, a recording of it on housingwire.com. So take a look at that, and just thank you all so much for being willing to come on and just have a candid conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.